Hi there, grief growers, and welcome to a live session on grief and the body. This is my first time doing a live here on my Instagram page with a guest, so I'm going to try and figure out how to add our dear Victoria to the call. Let's see. If I can get her on the call. Hi there, good to see you here. Looks like we're waiting for Victoria to join, but I'm really excited to go live today and talk about grief in the body because this is something that doesn't often get spoken about within the larger grief world. I think there's this misconception that grief is an emotional experience or a mental experience and not one that really impacts the physical container of our bodies. But in all reality, grief is something that affects mind, body, spirit, heart, emotions, everything else. So please let us know if you're watching in the comments how grief has affected your body, or if you have questions about what it means to experience grief in the body and how that's different from experiencing it here or here. Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Victoria's online and is requested to join, so I'm really excited to share the mic with her today. Hi, Victoria. Can you hear and see me? Okay.
Shelby, yes.
Yay!
How
I am
are
so
you?
excited. I'm reasonably well. I love that we're talking about grief in the body today, because you saw my post earlier where I literally went back to bed, but because everyone's bodies where I physically am are being affected by the California wildfires. I live in Northwest Washington, and we're receiving a lot of smoke coming our way, and so there's this residual environmental grief that's literally in the air right now. And so there's like the body's experiencing of that too, literally breathing in the grief of somewhere in the world being on fire. So for grief growers who are watching right now and are not familiar with you and your work, tell us a little bit about you and what you do and how you know so much about grief in the body.
Well, so my name is Victoria Albina. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming to you live from occupied Lenape territory, also known as the Hudson Valley of New York State. I am a holistic nurse practitioner, life coach, breath worker, and host of the podcast Feminist Wellness. And my work is focused on the ways that codependency, perfectionism, and people pleasing hold us back, with a particular focus on the experience of humans socialized as women and how we are taught to chronically put ourselves last, which is, yeah, that can bring some grief in, right?
Totally.
Yeah,
Totally.
yeah. Yeah, so my work is that intersection of looking at the mind and cognition and how our thoughts can keep us trapped in these loops, but also where grief, where stress, where socialization, conditioning, how these things live in the soma, live in the body, and to really support folks to break out of that thinking we've been taught, particularly here in the US, in the West, of thinking that mind and body are separate, when in fact
Mm,
they are one. And
yes.
right, in coming back to the body, we find healing for the mind and the spirit and all the vice versas.
Yes, and I'm really excited to hear you say that because Grief Growers will be airing a full 45-minute conversation with Victoria tomorrow on Coming Back, so you can hear a full podcast episode where we do a deep dive into grief in the body. But for all intents and purposes now, I love this visual of mind and body being married to each other, because this is something that didn't really occur to me after the death of my mother. And probably because in westernized society, we're socialized to believe that mind and body are very separate. I was like, my body is a machine. It's the thing that holds me up. It's not really attached to my emotions or my feelings or the story of my life. It's just the container that I'm in right now. And that all came to a screeching halt after the death of my mother. And I was diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, in addition to so many other things, where my body was like, we just can't do this anymore. And all of a sudden I was like, that's a message I've never heard. And so there was this dropping into of, oh, the body is more than a body. It is also some kind of messenger.
Yes, absolutely. And so often we are taught that our symptoms are problems, that there's
Mm-hmm.
something to be fixed or changed, right? But I really deeply believe, and I say this having been sick, right? I think you only get to say this really if you've been very, very sick. And I was very sick the first 35 years of my life. And I live with chronic pain now. And so I really have come to see my symptoms as my greatest gift. And I know all the big F you, Vic, of like, how dare
Mm-hmm.
you? And, right, totally. Yeah. New
Symptoms
York's
as
here
a
to
as a
stay.
gift? Screw that. Yeah.
Totally, right? And I don't mean that in some like positive vibes only. Like, look at everything else positive. Cause like I'm never ever that gal. Like never have been, never will be. I'm a New York
Mm-hmm.
realist, right? I'm from New York and Buenos Aires. We don't fuck around. And I really say that our symptoms are gifts because they're an invitation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we can also hold the duality of like, do I want to live with chronic pain? I mean, no. If a unicorn was like, I can take that away. Yes, and it's the signal from my body that there's something a place to pay attention to, right?
Right. And so, if grief growers, if you're struggling to hear my body's symptoms are a gift, perhaps reinterpret as invitation, message, signal, which
Oh,
are maybe more neutral, because this is
yes.
something that we talk about in grief too, is that so often our goal is to get from sad to happy. And I'm like, what if we just went from sad to neutral and then tried neutral to happy? Because this middle step of seeing things as neutral is a lot easier on grieving spirits. Is like, I'm not ready to see this as positive, good vibes only. So maybe the word gift is not helpful, but signal, messenger. Yeah, absolutely.
Love that. Thank you for that. I really appreciate You're such a good listener. Thank you. I
Well,
really
totally. And if you had told me my symptoms were a gift too, I would have given you that middle finger. I said, I feel like crap. This is not a blessing. This is not, because I think there's this perception of, especially in good vibes only culture that we're victim to here in the United States, especially, is that I'm supposed to learn something from this. I'm supposed to know what it is, and I'm supposed to be happy about it right now. And so I wonder how you work with clients and change thought patterns when the experience of being in the body is so miserable. Whether I feel like I'm stuck, I'm exhausted, I have no energy, or I actually have a diagnosis that I hate living with.
Oh, I love that framing. So the first step is to, exactly as you said, find that place of getting neutral about it, because it's from that place of really just seeing that this is neutral until I put a human thought on it.
Mm-hmm.
From there, you can make a decision about how you want to choose to think and feel about it. And if you want to continue to think it's miserable and terrible and like stay in that, as long as your mind, body, spirit needs, baby, go ahead. Right? You can,
Ain't nobody stopping you.
nobody here. Right? But from neutral, we have all this power, right? From neutral, like I even feel it in my physiology, right? I
Mm-hmm.
say from neutral, and I feel my physical being expand. From neutral, I can make choices. From neutral, I decide what my next thought and my next feeling are. So when I wake up with chronic pain, I no longer choose to say, this is fucking miserable, I hate this. But I simply start with, this is what is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is really important, whether we're talking about grief or pain or IBS or adrenals or thyroid or whatever. Accepting what is doesn't mean condoning,
Right.
right? It doesn't mean saying, it's okay, it's totally fine, I'm great with it, thanks. Again, like F you, right? Accepting what is gives you the power to make the next right choice for yourself.
Right. And I love even this hearing you talk about this too. I'm like, there is freedom in accepting what is.
Yeah.
I get chest opening. That's my symbol for freedom, or burden off the shoulders. I have like physical
Yeah.
markers of like, here's what it feels like in my body. And This reminds me of a quote that's part of the book I have out. It says, acceptance asks only that you embrace what's true. And so it's not about liking a situation. It's not about wanting to be there. It's not about being happy about it, which is like the hardest part for a lot of grievers. It's like, how do I be here and be grateful? I'm like, let's scratch gratitude from the equation immediately. But how do we just start by being here? And that's really vital and seems like a bit of the work that you do. And I just love that that's a factor. I think the next place I want to go is, especially with grief and loss, we get ourselves into these headspaces of like, rumination and stressing ourselves out and taking on more than we can handle, either as caregivers or responding to a great loss like the death of a loved one. And so sometimes the things that happen to our bodies fit into this story we tell ourselves of, it's all my fault. I have brought this upon myself. And so what happens when we're kind of stuck in that thought pattern of, not only am I grieving and experiencing physical symptoms of grief, but I feel like I'm the cause of my own pain?
Yeah. So that is what the Buddhists, and I do not claim to be a Buddhist, but I am a big fan of many Buddhist writings, would call the second arrow. So shooting the second arrow. There's one of the early episodes of my podcast, Feminist Wellness, is all about this. So the first arrow is what life shoots at you: the death, the loss, the fire, the breakup, the childhood trauma. And the second arrow is it's my fault. I did this. I should have shown up for him more. When I was a hospice nurse, I heard this all the time, right? So your loved one goes into hospice and then, oh, if only, I had spent more time with her, now she's dying. If only I had, done whatever career he wanted me to do, now he's dying. Right. And so it's taking that moment when there is a great loss and simply compounding it. Right. It doesn't help your loved one who's passing or passed. It doesn't put the fires out. Right. But it does make your daily experience of living in this world a heavier, more painful thing to move through. To head back into acceptance. When we are in acceptance, we can take action. When we are fighting reality or shooting the second arrow, what action can we take, right? The action we are taking in that moment is sitting in the worry, sitting in the past dwelling, the future forecasting, right? We are not in this present moment, experiencing the gift of being alive, the pain of being alive, the everything of being alive. We're not taking action, and we're not actually bringing in more healing for ourselves or the world.
Yeah, kind of, you put a wall or a door up to
Right.
that. Yes, there's no invitation to healing when the story is, it's all my fault.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think what it does is it's a buffering. So I talk a lot about this framework of buffering. It comes from psychology in the 70s. And it was actually used I think we talked about this in the podcast. Now it came back to me, but so a little foreshadowing, my darling. So buffering is this term that can be a very beautiful thing. So when someone dies, folks bring you lasagna, right? They bring a casserole. They support you and put this loving, I think of bumper cars, right?
Yeah.
This loving bumper.
I'm thinking bowling with bumpers.
Yeah, bowling with bumpers. But the thing is, if you're always bowling with bumpers, if you're always putting something between yourself and actually living the experience of the grief, the pain, the joy, the comfort, because we do that too, you're never fully experiencing, and you're therefore not showing yourself that you are in your strength when you're feeling your feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so sometimes telling that it's all my fault story is actually, it's really interesting psychologically, a way to push away the pain of the actual loss. Because instead of being like, I am simply grieving because my beloved human or animal or forest is now gone, and that sort of existential question of our mortality and what it means to be a living mammal on this planet, that is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to look at and to bear and to manage and to, right, find. You have a whole academy around this because it is a lot.
Yeah.
So instead of dealing with that big boulder, oh, it's my fault. Oh, I'm so bad. Oh, I should have. If
Mm-hmm.
only.
Well, and I think that too contributes to this illusion that we have control over everything,
Right.
including our bodies.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And there's almost this temptation to punish our bodies for reacting normally to loss. And we do this for things that are small, like tears. Like, how dare I be crying right now? I'm like, crying is kind of a normal thing to do when somebody you love dies or when you experience great loss. But we do this with larger things too, like major diagnoses or chronic conditions that are lifelong. Um, let's see. Yes. I'm looking at a comment here. Lindsay Briggs says it also helps us avoid feelings of powerlessness by claiming some agency. So yes, when we have this illusion of control, it's almost as if we can say, well, I was partially in charge of this, so I should be able to fix it. Therefore, I'm not powerless. When in reality, what we need to grieve is some essential human powerlessness. That's a reality that
Yeah.
we all have. And
Yes.
that's real. That's harder to acknowledge because it's easier to say I could have had some control over this, I could have
Right.
fixed it, than to
Right.
say I'm actually totally powerless here because there's the illusion that there's nothing to do. That moves me into a next question of so many grieving people talk to me and they say grief feels so large, so massive, so monumental that either I don't know where to start or it terrifies me to start at all. And so if people are looking to get into their body's expression of grief or start to address aches, pains, illnesses, fears they have surrounding the body, like where do we begin? And possibly a second part to that is like, how do we retreat back to a safe place of safety when it gets overwhelming to engage with the body?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say that this is when we remember to not go into a dark alley alone at night.
Mm, yeah.
Yep. This is why people are trained in this, why people are hospice chaplains, amen for them, hospice nurses, grief coaches and counselors and therapists, life coaches, right? Like this is why there's a million schools of therapeutic training to support folks going through something as monumental and massive as grieving the loss of a loved one. So I would remind you that it is natural and normal and healthy to ask for support. Again, why not blame the US? This culture, why not? What else are we
Why
doing?
not? We're already blaming ourselves
Crazy?
on it
Why
anyway.
not? So, this culture is obsessed with this like Horatio Alger's rugged individualist, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, right? Suck it up, buttercup kind of framework of life where we're supposed to go these things alone. And it's not science, right? It's not loving, it's not kind. We are pack animals. Our nervous systems need one another. We
Mm-hmm.
need to rely on one another. We need one another's support. We need to be seen and heard and cared for and to co-regulate our nervous systems. That's how humans work because science, right? So find a grown-up, hold their hand, and recognize that your inner children, particularly if you lost a parent, a sibling, someone in one of those familial roles, your inner children are going to come rearing to the surface, asking to be held and comforted.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a gift to yourself. And knowing epigenetics, it is a gift to future generations for you to seek care. So start there, right? Start there. Next, I think it's really, really important for us to continue to disarticulate this story that feelings are something to be fixed. And so the more that we can simply spend time being in the feelings without judging, without criticizing, without wishing they were different, wanting them to be different, seeking to change them, but rather just saying, here they are. Here they are,
Yeah.
right?
It's moving
Yeah,
again from that space of negative to neutral without
right,
forced positivity on top of the whole thing. Mm-hmm.
right. Yeah. So simply noticing when I think about ex loved one who's passed, oh, yeah, my jaw just got tight.
Mm.
Okay, yeah, actually, also my shoulders just got kind of tight. Oh, I have a little bellyache. Okay, curious. I'm curious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not to jump into sense making, to not to jump to the intellect. And the intellect is incredibly important. It's a powerful regulating tool. And we can jump to hyper intellectualizing and overthinking again as a buffer.
Here we
Right,
go.
keep us listed. Here we go.
I'm
Let's
brilliant at this.
ruminate. Yeah. So instead of hopping into trying to tell the story of your feelings, trying to make English or, trying to make words of them, you simply get to allow yourself, and it is an allowing. I'm feeling these tensions. I'm feeling this tightening, this constraint, and to really feel into it and to allow yourself that time. So I think you'll like this one. At the beginning of COVID, I found that my brain was really distracted. And for me, it was largely in New York City, also occupied Lenape territory. I was really thinking a lot about like all the little abuelitas in the Bronx who weren't getting their social connection or their meals or the income from their, granddaughter who just lost her waitress job. My brain was really, that was where I was really struggling, was thinking about them. And so I found that the grief and worry and despair and all that was leaking into everything in my life.
Yeah.
Right. I literally calendared crying time.
I love
And
this
so,
tip.
right. And if I didn't want to cry, I didn't cry. But every morning built it into my routine to sit and think about, just give myself space in my mind, body, and spirit to just check in, to see if there was an emotion, a felt sensation, a tension, a constraint, an armoring
Mm-hmm.
around this global situation, but particularly what was happening in my city that needed to be expressed. And
Yeah.
sometimes that would be writing, drawing, crying, movement, right? Sometimes my body would want to put on music and just do that somatic movement, right? Just let my body just work it out. And I would notice my breath, and my breath would tighten as my brain would turn on.
Mm-hmm.
Release, right? And there's that gentle invitation, release. You don't have to go to thinking. Back to the body. Move, dance, right? Bring music in. Release as soon as that tightening. And so I know for me, and this is a large part of the work I do with folks, is to really start to notice your own physical sensations, the experience of your feelings, so that you can bring your awareness to them when it's a whisper. Not because going to full-on crying is bad, not because going into full-on anger is bad. These things are amazing and important, but to be able to resource yourself and support yourself so you can move into the anger knowing you've got your back. So you can sob your eyes out for the abuelitas knowing you've got your back.
Mm-hmm. And for me, almost, it feels like when I have this, I'm going to use the word radar, when I have this radar on my body, it's like I'm going in informed. And I think what so many grieving people are afraid of is that, well, if I spiral into this place or I really tune into my pain, I'm going to get lost there. I won't know where I am. But if you start in the body and you're like, I feel pain in my solar plexus every time I think of my mother, or I get up and my shoulders are always like this, and so I need to go down like this. And so almost keeping this, I keep records of like my body, almost as if I'm my own doctor. I'm like, this morning, shoulders are tight, jaw is clenched, didn't sleep very well last night. And so I can start to see these patterns of insomnia or stress, or when I'm stressed about money, it lives in my chest, or whatever, wherever things show up. And so when I do have these meltdowns, because they're invariable, inevitable, they come from this place of, oh, it's almost like I could see this coming, like I could predict it in a way, but I can fully participate when I have all the information about my body. It's not a disjointed thing. I'm not lost. I haven't
Right.
fallen off a map. I'm following exactly where my body's been telling me to go the whole time, which is melt down, and then we'll feel better. But it's like I've got my data, I've got my resources behind me,
Right.
in the body with grief. Yeah.
Ah, and you're in your integrity
Yes.
in all senses of the word, right? Integral, whole, integrity of honoring and living in honesty, which is a large part of what being in my integrity means, right?
Because there's body denying that happens very much of the time.
Yeah. Which, and I know this is in keeping with your message as well, like, that's beautiful. That's okay. It doesn't serve you for shit, but like, baby, don't judge it. Right? It's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're not healing. It doesn't mean you're a bad griever, right? It's just part of the process. There's a
Right.
thing you can't look at, right? And that comes back to this concept of human nervous systems, the body, mind, psyche, spirit, having this window of capacity. Classically, the literature calls it window of tolerance. And
Yeah.
I love Jane Clapp. She's this amazing trauma therapist, movement therapist, somatic worker, calls it the window of capacity. So it's what our bodies are capable of holding, withstanding, working with, experiencing before we are shunted out of our ability to stay with it, right? Into that sympathetic fight or flight freak out or dorsal shutdown immobilization.
Well, right, because we can't go from not sensing our bodies at all to totally being 100% aware of our bodies all the time overnight. And I think for so many people, it's that dichotomy that's the expectation. It's like I'm either in total denial that my body exists or I'm always in tune with my body. And this is something that I've had to learn too. And you're correct that body denial is not bad. It's almost like I had to learn what it was like to not feel at home in my body, to recognize what it is to feel at home in my body. And I'm not grateful for that part of the journey. It didn't feel good at all, blah, 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 and all that implies. But then there's this recognition too of like when I'm really in my body, I'm like, I know what that is because it's not that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the population I work with, the folks I'm most called to be of service to, are folks with habitual thoughts that lead to codependent, perfectionist, and people-pleasing thinking. And those ways of coping, because they're all skills. Those are gorgeous, amazing skills that get you through childhood and get you through life. Don't serve you at a point, but a hallmark is black and white thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And learning to find that gray, like what is that gray of interdependence, right? Of saying me first, you second with love, of not shooting that second arrow, of allowing yourself to feel the ebbs and flows of grief, the ebbs and flows of joy, the ebbs and flows of uncertainty, right? The ebbs and flows of it all that come from the body first.
Yeah. Yeah. And using it again for those messages or those calls instead of, I hate that this is a symptom. It's a different voice we use with ourselves.
Right. There's a tenderness in there, right? There's tenderness that comes, right? When asked what my favorite supplement is, because I get that question a lot, I have two: tenderness and self-love.
It's not like vitamin B.
No, that's a good one though too. You should take your
Yes,
vitamins.
totally. Yeah. But tenderness and self-love. And I think I have my own suggestion on how to cultivate this, but I wonder for people for whom self-tenderness and self-love are kind of foreign concepts, it's like, how do I start to summon that in and for my body, but also beyond in grief?
Yeah. Well, I think we first need to start with a dedication to the thought that healing isn't linear. Right? Because if we're coming to the practice from a thought, I'm going to learn how to do self-loves, I'm going to learn how to be, right?
I started marching right away.
Yeah, it ain't that, right?
Yeah.
It's so from that understanding and from coming to believe that it's totally normal, mammalian science spirit, it's yes, mammals will feel really sad and then they'll watch a funny video and they'll feel happy and right, like here it is. From believing that, then next, what we get to do is to do what I call the minimum baseline. So to pick one tiny, sweet, little, doable action, thought,
Mm.
right? Something to bring in that connection with your own tenderness, your self trust. Because often what's lacking when we are out of self love, when we are being unkind to ourselves, when we are beating ourselves up, is that we don't trust ourselves to do it any differently because we don't have the evidence. Right. So, again, with this duality, you can decide you're going to step into greater self love without the evidence and can start acting in self loving ways. And you can start to build the evidence by choosing that minimum baseline, that one little thing, right? Today, I'm going to take one deep breath as my act of self love. The thought that will lead me to that is, I deserve to feel self love. That will produce the feeling of love within yourself, allows you to take that action. And that long, slow out, breathing off all that CO2, that's what moves us into parasympathetic, right? And that creates the result of showing yourself. I committed to do this one little thing, I did it. All right, I can trust myself to do it tomorrow. Therefore, I can begin to trust myself that when that self-critical voice is like, meow, 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 like inside your ear, right? You get to turn to it and be like, hi, babe. And I like to evoke Alexis from Schitt's Creek. So like, hi, babe. So no, thank you. It just makes me laugh, which brings a little levity and a little fun.
1,000%.
Right? But like,
Well, and that reminds me of I worked with a coach once when I was first starting to do grief work, and I had all these itchy, ratchy, kind of in the inner ear stories that I told myself all the time. And the coach was like, well, what if we gave that voice or voice a personhood and like a name and an identity, and it made them this like really angry 17-year-old internet troll boy who was like sitting in a basement typing angry comments on the internet. And so now perceiving that voice as that person, it's like, I'm not even friends with you. Like, and so to
get out of
frame,
my ears.
get out of my ear. Like, I'm not friends with you. Like, you're living there down there rent free in my house in the basement.
Right?
And so it creates this different kind of relationship with, yeah, self-talk voice. And I love you. I love you. You're like, babe, no, ew. I don't want any of that. Ew. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the
I
proof
love
that we
that.
can do these tiny things, that small is enough in grief,
Yeah.
because there's this perception that if I can't overhaul the whole thing all at once, or if I'm not feeling better by tomorrow or in the next 10 minutes or whenever this live broadcast is over, if I'm not feeling better by then, that it's not working and it goes out in the dumpster. Yeah.
Well, that's a perfectionist thought fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Like just so classically perfectionist of like, okay, I'm going to do all the things right now. I have 10 minutes. I'm going to paint the whole house. I have 12 minutes. I'm going to just build a house from scratch. I've actually never run outside of PE in middle school, but I think a marathon is a great call. Let's do like the New York City one tomorrow. Is that tomorrow? Let's do that tomorrow. Right? And so when that's our framework of overworking to prove our worth, overworking to feel safe, overworking to have some modicum of a sense of control, safety, agency, we apply it everywhere, including to the process of grief, as you just so elegantly said. Yeah. Those perfectionist thought fantasies, man, they're a real kick in the pants.
Well, and they don't leave you alone in grief either. They like infiltrate in
Rude.
that area too. Rude. Hashtag rude. So for grief growers who are watching, many of you are followers of mine, many of you are followers of Victoria's, many of you have never heard of either of us, so thank you for joining us here this afternoon. But I wanted to do a really quick shameless plug and let you know I'm coming out with a book in less than 2 weeks now. It's called Your Grief Your Way. I don't know if it's showing up backwards on your video, but it might possibly be. I've got one page earmarked because there is some advice in here about, okay, I'm feeling grief in the body, so now what the heck do I do with it, or where do I go? And April 17th, nope, April 19th, this is a daily guide for grief, is consider seeing a doctor, chiropractor, nutritionist, acupuncturist, Reiki practitioner, or massage therapist about your body's various grief pains. When you make your appointment, let them know you've suffered a loss recently and are feeling unwell. If they dismiss your pain or make you feel crazy for grieving, do not book an appointment and continue searching for another practitioner. If they do take your grief pain seriously, make a list of your symptoms to discuss during your time together. Stay open to their suggestions for wellness and know that you are not the only one who's experienced physical pain after the death of a loved one. And I wanted to bring this up because I know that you work with people who are grieving, especially codependent and perfectionistic tendencies, if those are also present within the grief. And use it as a guide to lead into how do people get in touch with you and participate with you in your work, because I know, Victoria, that you are hyper grief friendly when it comes to working with clients.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, something that just popped into my head, though I will take that very kind offering. Grief often lives in the lungs. I can't believe I didn't say that, 40 minutes ago in this COVID moment, right? Often lives in the lungs, as well as the hips. But they're two really classic places, that hip flexor tension, right? As we contract inward from the pain, from the stress, but in the lungs. So
yeah.
If grief is present in your life during this global pandemic that affects the lungs, I mean, we could have a whole other conversation about the earth leaving.
And the symbolism of that.
Let's book that one soon. But
okay.
pay attention to the lungs and your breathing, right? Not seeking to change the breath, but bring awareness to it when your thoughts, when your mind goes to your grief. Just see what happens. Bring curiosity there.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that kind of invitation. So you can follow me here on the gram at Victoria Albina Wellness. You can find me on the internets at victoriaalbina.com. And if you head on over there on the homepage, there is a set of meditations that you can get for free, totally on the house, just by putting your little email in there, and that'll put you on my list so you'll get the first notification of everything I am doing in the world. I have some free and low-cost breathwork opportunities coming up soon. And there is, I think, just one spot left in my 6-month masterclass. So it's a 6-month journey into overcoming codependency, perfectionism, and people-pleasing. And it starts September 28th, which is so exciting. And I think if my math is right, there's one spot left. But if you don't make it in this round, we'll be doing it again in 2021. So get on my email list. And the podcast is called Feminist Wellness. It's on Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, Apple. It's all the things. And it's free because I love being of service.
Yes. Yeah. And gosh, especially when I was grieving, I was like, what's free first? And then I dove into everything else that was paid. It's like I need a trial of the voice or the spirit of the intention behind the thing. And it's like, then I, hit the ground running. Yes. Yeah. But grief growers who are watching, Victoria is a person for whom, if your whole life you have been second in line, this is her zone of genius and her space, especially if you feel as if you're coming secondary to your own grief. And so it's a way to lovingly take your power back, take your voice back, take your space back, take your breath back. Yeah, with a practitioner who really knows her stuff. And watch episode of Coming Back tomorrow with Victoria is dropping about 3:00 p.m. Pacific time. And we'll have a whole conversation totally separate from this about grief and the body and where it lives and how we can release it. And really vital work that you're doing. And I just love knowing that you exist out in the world.
you're a really special one. For folks listening who listen to Shelby's amazing podcast, if you have not subscribed, rated, and reviewed it on Apple Podcasts, I implore you to go do that now. The reason we always bug you to do this is because there are 1 bajillion podcasts in the world, and Apple only shows folks the ones that have the most ratings, reviews, and subscribers. And so we are both out here putting out hundreds of hours of free content because we are full of love and we care about your dance, girl. And yeah, we're here to be of service, and we want to get our messages out. I know Shelby puts so much love and care into her show. So if you are getting something from it, subscribe, rate, and review. Do that right now, please and thank you, for sweet Shelby.
Yes, and thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, Victoria. It's a joy, and I can't wait to have our episode go tomorrow.
Me too. I am thrilled, and I thank you for all that you do in the world as a human, as a former hospice nurse, as a fellow coach. Thank you.
Yes, yes, and for grief growers watching too, this replay will be live forever and ever on my Instagram page as an IGTV. So give me about 20 minutes and I'll have it go live. But thank you so much, and you can get in touch with myself or Victoria at your leisure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.